Good morning, and on behalf of the Rockefeller Foundation, thank you for inviting us to participate. We're all ambitious in our respective pursuit of the global goals, and I dare say we're optimists, and if anyone is not, I had the privilege of sitting next to Selena last night, and this is possible, and this is exciting, and certainly at the Foundation we believe it's achievable. We have 103 years of experience behind us, and we invest our philanthropic dollars when we truly believe that's what's needed to solve a problem. So we have committed $130 million to having food loss and waste through our YieldWise initiative, which we launched in January. And we very much see this work as the next chapter in our food security legacy. If our 20th century work was rooted, so to speak, in building the green revolution and providing support, research development to feed 1 billion people, our YieldWise initiative is our 21st century commitment to a greener revolution, because we produce the food that we need, but we need to use it much more wisely and respect the resources that are needed for doing that. Because it doesn't matter if we have all the food we need if we are losing or wasting it up to half of it. So what's encouraging about all of us sitting in this room today and about the solutions to this problem more generally is that, as Tuan said, there are multiple causes. It's a systemic problem from field to fork, and one with multiple solutions. And as we've already heard a few times today, we all have a role to play. And all along the supply chain there are losses, and once retailers and consumers get involved, we see waste. And fundamentally, we are talking about small, incremental, and coordinated changes in behavior that in sum will make a big difference. And I think the example that we just saw of imperfect produce or ugly or wonky vegetables, depending on where you call home, is a good example. It's a bit of a poster child because it is in fact so photogenic, but it's an example of a problem that has impacts up and down the value chain. So if consumers will accept that imperfect produce is just as good as perfect produce, then retailers will sell it. Or if retailers start selling it and socialize consumers to buy it, change happens. In either scenario, farmers win and there's less waste. And we're seeing progress on this front. We just saw a picture of the Inglorious Fruits campaign in France. We see movement in the US with Whole Foods and with Gotham Greens. And UK-based Tesco began featuring misshapen fruits and vegetables in earnest in 2013. And I want to talk a little bit more about the Tesco story for a moment, because I think this is where we start to see the links across the global supply chains. One of our grantees, a group that many of you probably know, Feedback, the UK charity led by Tristram Stewart, conducted a value chain assessment of green beans in Kenya a few years ago. And Kenyans are not typically consumers of green beans. It's not part of the local diet. These were beans being grown for export, primarily to the UK, and where consumers are accustomed to having their perfectly sized haricots verts, which is of course not how beans grow. And so a huge number of beans, I think it could have been up to 40%, were being left in the field or near the processing center. And this happens in other places too. And so this got us at the Foundation thinking about what this means for emerging markets and consumers and the growing urban centers where for better or worse, probably worse, there's a tendency to emulate the practices of established middle classes in places like Europe and the UK. So while the bulk of our YieldWise investments at the moment are in fact directed towards reducing post-harvest loss in sub-Saharan Africa, we are investing in reducing food waste in the US and beyond, and looking a few years down the road to where these investment streams could start to converge. So for instance, many major grocery retailers are expanding across Asia and Africa right now, Marks & Spencer, Carrefour, and also sourcing there, both for local supplies and for export markets. So one pressing question before us is, again, how do we prevent importing the wasteful habits of Europe and the US, such as the desire for perfect produce, particularly in cities that are accustomed to local markets, to farm fresh produce that is oddly shaped and sized. So how do we make that what gets sold on the produce shelves of supermarkets? They are an inevitability, but the waste that goes along with them doesn't have to be. this is obviously about a lot more than perfect or imperfect produce. So similarly, how do those who are sourcing reduce waste and also enhance farmer incomes? Is there an opportunity for derivative products in local markets? Is there an opportunity to work with chefs in places with rising food cultures? I think Peru is a terrific example, to create demand for some of these leftovers. There's an opportunity to create new businesses to support these potential local demands. And I think one more thought starter and anecdote along these lines. My colleague in Nairobi, who's been leading our post-harvest loss work stream, has a cook who's Kenyan, and he has had the hardest time convincing her that food waste is bad. And that leftovers should not be thrown away, because she sees it as honoring his perceived wealth to be able to throw away the leftovers. And that's just perverse. And so I think what we have here is the opportunity to get ahead of that. We know that this is fundamentally about behavior change. How do we get ahead of potentially really damaging behavior changes? And I have more to say, but I will stop there.
Thank you so much.